the decipherment of the 120,000 cuneiform tablets that were collected here. And they still find pieces of the Gilgamesh epic and other important texts, and together continue to reconstruct the past. Whilst in the galleries, we give our visitors who might not be fluent in cuneiform a possibility to imagine what that library looked like, and how the tablets were stored, and what the texts of the tablets actually talked about. So in the shelves and in the showcases, we expose to our visitors, we show them what these texts, the function of the text, and some of these tablets still carry the marks of the fire of 612 BCE, which baked those tablets and made them more resistant, and this is why they've come down onto us. And the British Museum did an enormous amount of work in cataloguing these cuneiform tablets. In this case, it was Karl Betzold, a German specialist who for many years worked at the British Museum and then published this monumental catalogue, which is still being used today. I come back to this moment of the end of the Ottoman Empire, when Marc Sykes and Georges-François Picot, on the 8th of May 1916, signed this map after having dissected this geographical space with a few lines into zones of influence with the consent of Russia. And these lines, even though they were changed in later treaties, are actually the very basis for the nations that were created after 1918 and the conflicts that ensued up to today. I talked about the work of the British Museum in the field of research, but also in popularizing ancient cultures and setting them in context. And here you see an image from the exhibition where we show those tablets that relate to the Gilgamesh epic poem. And you can see here how over decades, as I said, scholars have worked together to reconstruct them. Now this reconstruction, the excavations, the discovery of ever new material, and the reconstruction of parts of the sites has been pursued by the authorities for antiquities and museums in Iraq after the Second World War. And as you can see here, the Nergal Gate at Nineveh incorporated parts of the finds, whilst the architecture as such is a modern reconstruction. And this discovery was not only the work of scholars for scholars and an endeavor to enhance our knowledge, it also served a political purpose, as you can see here. You see Ashurbanipal hunting lions, and you see one of the persons who considered himself a successor to these kings pursuing more or less the same activity. In other words, the rediscovery of the past is being used, or the iconography of the past is being used to justify political aims of the present, leading to what we all have seen on television almost live, the two wars and the occupation of Iraq. The dismantlement of large parts of the civil service and of the military in the wake of the occupation after 2003. And I'll come back to this in a minute. What you see here is a colleague from the Antiquities Board reconstructing one of the lamassus who in Mosul, in Nineveh, a few months before Daesh would conquer this region. An incredible amount of work by archaeologists and heritage specialists in Iraq had been accomplished to excavate and secure this past and to make sure that it is preserved for future generations. Daesh, you remember, came into being basically under the leadership of those who had served Saddam and who had been dismantled, imprisoned, and been excluded from public life. And they, if you like, used the radicalization under the sign of religion to reconquer the territory they felt they had lost, only to target systematically and to destroy heritage sites. In other words, the past that you can relate to, in order to look beyond the ideological blinkers that those who seek absolute power want to force upon you. The damage was immense. 60% of Nineveh is lost, 80% of Nimrud, and there are other places which suffered even greater damage. Now, when the very day when Daesh crossed the line between Iraq and Syria, they published a hashtag, and the hashtag reads Sykes-Picot over. In other words, a very clear awareness of the deep and the immediate history of the region and their political project of a caliphate transcending national borders was actually justified by saying, we do this in order to put an end to a political order which was forced upon us from outside. Here you see the destruction of the museum in Mosul by Daesh. The smaller objects had been brought to Baghdad, fortunately. The bigger objects, like the lamassus, who had to remain in place, partly because they had been integrated into the architecture, were destroyed. 813 sculptures and statues. The library and the archive were burned, and the museum was bombed. The British Museum, with the help of the British government, and I say this also in being aware of the findings of the Chilcot report on the involvement of the British government in the war, Tony Blair's role in it, in fact. The British Museum launched the Iraq training scheme in 2016 with the help of the British government. It's funded by the British government. And with this scheme, we offer to colleagues from Iraq the possibility to come to the British Museum for 3 months and to work with the specialists of the British Museum, curators, scholars, conservators, learn new methods on new equipment, and then take this equipment back to Iraq and join archaeologists from the British Museum, John McGuinness on the right and Sébastien Rey on the left, on excavation sites in Darband-i-Rania in the north, in Iraqi Kurdistan, and in Girsu, today Tello, in the south. This has enabled a number of our colleagues from Iraq to move into senior positions and to actively survey the sites today and to develop strategies to save what can be saved. And for quite a number of these colleagues who have witnessed the destruction of their museums and the sites they were responsible for, apart from losses in almost every family of the colleagues we welcome to the British Museum, it offers for many of these colleagues the possibility to work in other areas than they normally do. So we had a group of 8 colleagues, women from Mosul, last year, who later on would go, for instance, to the south of Iraq for the first time and do digs excavating the first bridge that we know of, the first bridge ever built, and a temple, a major temple from 2400 BCE. And as I said, they're working on the documentation of the destruction of the old city of Mosul and other sites. Now, this is my last slide. And this shows a lamassu that was discovered when the fighters of Daesh, of ISIS, dug tunnels in Nineveh to protect themselves, but also to dig up stuff they might sell on the black market. And in digging tunnels, they discovered material that nobody had seen before. Reliefs, statues, lamassus. And this lamassu, they had no time to destroy. So it remains there in its tunnel today. A major find, with the marks of the fire of 612 BCE on its flank. Now, if you ask this lamassu today where it wants to go, what would it say? Would it say, I want to go back to the quarry because nobody had the right to carve me out of stone anyway, in the first place? Or would it say, let me stay here underground. I don't want to witness any more destructions. I've had it, and I'm finished with humankind. Or would it say, let me go to the National Museum in Baghdad? Or would it say, I want to go to the British Museum? Or would it say, bring back the lamassus from the British Museum and the Louvre so we can join up again? Or would it say, I want to be part of a reconstruction of the old palace? Or would it accept to be integrated into what professional archaeologists quite frequently call a Disneyland of reconstruction? Or would it simply say, wherever I am, I just want to be part of this ever-growing and expanding rhizome of knowledge and of references through all times and through all cultures that have ever existed, and to be part of a museum which transcends all borders, transcends all limits, and that is there to teach humankind what it takes to create a culture, what it takes to keep it alive, and what it takes to use it to heal, to understand, to heal, and to prevent. Now, I'm sure you found the answer to the question for the lamassu. I haven't found it yet. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We have some time for questions. If you have questions, please ask. If you have questions, please just identify yourself briefly.
I don't have any question. I would sum up. I would begin where you ended. Various options which you have given us to the audience. What we should ask this Damasu to think. So before invading all these territories, the army and all the people the various countries involved in it, they should have sent some archaeologists, museologists, train them this personnel that please look after this heritage of the world. Let us all prevent as much as possible so that the Lamas will survive for another thousands of years. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's a very pertinent observation, that even though we might not be sure to prevent conflicts, if there be conflicts, be aware of the cultural heritage and protect it, and assume your responsibility to protect it.
In fact, the Second World War, French has given a support not to destroy, German has given a support not to destroy French collection.
During the Second World War, the Germans gave instructions not to destroy French artifacts.
Yes.
Are you aware of that? I don't know.
I think that's a very complex question. In fact, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not a specialist in this area. When it's the Second World War you're talking about, there was the intention to massively destroy cultural heritage during the retreat, but it was down to a few people who refused to follow orders that thankfully this did not happen. But we know about the destruction of that time, so it was a few people who prevented this from happening.
Ashurbanipal the first or Ashurbanipal the second that you were talking about?
It is. I'm not aware that there's a first. There were two. Well, he was the last. Ashurbanipal was the last great ruler of Assyria, and as I said, with him ends the great period of the Assyrian Empire, and there's the following 2 decades are actually the slow decay of the empire and the progressive conquest by Babylon and the Medes.
Yeah, given the spate of destruction, there's a long history of that, the Bamiyan Buddhas, etc. Are there any international laws that exist or are in the process of being created to, in some ways, prevent these crimes against art objects and heritage? And if they don't exist and they are in the process of being created, then what would be the agencies that would take on this task? Would governments be involved in this, or would museum directors be involved?
Both have to be involved, plus those who are in charge of cultural heritage directly. But of course, since the late 19th century with the Hague Convention, the international community has tried to set up rules to protect cultural heritage. And the 1970 UNESCO Convention is perhaps the most important document to this effect, which has been followed up by more recent agreements. There is no such thing as the responsibility to protect that the UN decided to put in place concerning people. There is no responsibility to protect concerning cultural heritage yet. And I think we're only at the beginning of the possibility to hold people responsible for the destruction of cultural heritage in the international court or criminal courts of the country. And of course, almost every country, I think probably every country today, has a legislation in place to protect its own cultural heritage. So you have a whole body of legal texts and legislation to work in this direction with more or less success.
There's a UNESCO document on the protection and promotion of monuments and collections, which I think enjoins each nation state to use their own legislation, but we are talking about times when they don't really matter. These are times of war and conflict, but there are these mechanisms. Yes, I have a question from there, and then we will.
So my question was with reference to the effects that fundamental ideologies can have on history, like you demonstrated, and also with reference to the agenda for the Rosetta project that you mentioned. So how does a museum, which is of course a state-sponsored, state